Hello. I think we will go ahead and get started, keep things moving here. Welcome to the session on roadside ditch inventory, inspection, and maintenance. My name is Emma Truitt. I am the Phase 1 Municipal Permit Writer for Ecology, and I will be your moderator today. This is not anybody's first session here today, so you kind of know the drill by now. Turn your phones off. We've got 20 minutes for the presentation, 10 minutes for Q&A at the end, and then also the presentation is being recorded, but the Q&A will not be recorded. So we have Rebecca Dugopolski and Doug Navetski giving the talk today. Rebecca is an associate engineer with Herrera Environmental Consultants in Seattle with over 13 years of experience in stormwater monitoring, design, and NPDES permit compliance. She received her bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from Michigan Technological University and her master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from the University of Washington. Ms. Dugopolski has worked with numerous Phase 1 and Phase 2 jurisdictions in Eastern and Western Washington to develop checklists, tools, and training to help permittees meet their NPDES permit requirements. Doug has over 35 years of experience working in environmental programs in the Pacific Northwest and throughout the Western and Southern United States. As a consultant, he conducted oceanographic and ecological studies in marine, estuarine, and freshwater ecosystems throughout the Western U.S. He has been at King County for the last 20 years and is the managing supervisor of the Water Quality Compliance Unit in King County's Stormwater Services section and the Municipal Permit Coordinator for King County. He is responsible for the implementation and coordination of stormwater management programs that are required by the Phase 1 Municipal NPDES permit, as well as the Vashon Island Pollution Identification and Correction Program, and 3 bacteria pollution reduction programs, also known as TMDLs. He is also managing King County's stormwater management efforts on the lower Duwamish Superfund cleanup. So welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce the presentation on these ditch maintenance practices. The overall goal of this project has been to research and develop practices that can maximize the potential of roadside ditches to help manage the flow and water quality of stormwater runoff. This presentation will be covering the study processes and the various study work products, and it is broken out by the following areas: the desktop analysis assessment, field evaluation, literature review, ditch maintenance matrix, field guide, and fact sheets. So, roadside ditch maintenance, this program, this study has been a pet project of mine for a number of years. I used to work at roads maintenance and was responsible for this. We often see this as an overlooked and underfunded aspect of stormwater management programs. Much of the work that's done to maintain roadside ditches is done through the perspective of maintaining the traveled surface or the roadside prism. But ditches are also stormwater conveyance structures. And for counties, they comprise a large part of our conveyance system. For King County, over 70% of our conveyance system is roadside ditches. The first step of this project was to conduct a literature review of local and national ditch maintenance resources to identify ditch maintenance practices. We then brought in King County road maintenance crews, and we involved Roadmap, which is a regional roads maintenance group looking at how to implement stormwater management practices for the roads departments. They filled in gaps that we had and reviewed all of the work products and processes that we were developing. The next step was to develop a desktop assessment and field evaluation of a number of ditches in King County. The information gathered from the desktop assessment and field evaluation, along with the literature review, was used to develop content for the ditch maintenance matrix and the ditch maintenance field guide. The funding that we got for doing this work came from the National Estuary Program, a grant from Washington State Department of Ecology. With the support of the Roadmap operations and maintenance personnel from Phase 1 and Phase 2 municipal permittees, They help do the following: to identify specific ditch characteristics, develop both a key that correlates ditch maintenance condition and hydrogeomorphic attributes with appropriate maintenance or enhancement strategies, and a rating system to help prioritize ditch maintenance projects. Rebecca will go into much more detail on the results of the study and the tools that we developed and the outcomes of the study, but the study was always focused on these elements: increase effectiveness of ditch maintenance programs, improve flow control and water quality function of existing ditches, reduce the harm to ecosystems from ditch maintenance, enlarge the ditch maintenance toolbox, refine ditch maintenance standards, and create an analytic tool that can be easily used by operations and maintenance personnel to correlate ditch condition with appropriate and effective maintenance or enhancement. Our hope is to continue this work and to find additional funding to do further studies that would look at developing this program and include ditch maintenance retrofit approaches that would utilize roadside ditches for stormwater management actions. And at this point, I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to Rebecca.
All right, thank you, Doug. So talking a little bit about our project background and our deliverables, this is laid out in 3 different tasks here. So our first task on the far left was the inventory and assessment. That included developing a desktop assessment data collection matrix and developing a field evaluation data collection matrix, and also the literature review that Doug mentioned that I'll go into more detail in just a minute. The middle task, task 2, focused on a ditch maintenance matrix. And then task 3 focused on the field guide and the fact sheets that we'll also be covering today. Breakdown of the timeline. We started this project back in July 2018. And so the inventory and assessment piece was wrapped up by the end of 2018. The ditch maintenance matrix we also worked on in late 2018 and early 2019. And then the field guide and fact sheets was last fall and then wrapped up at the end of February. So focusing first on the desktop assessment, I wanted to walk through some of the pieces of that. So we worked on developing a list of criteria that we'd look at as part of the desktop assessment that fell into these 4 main categories: location, road characteristics, ditch characteristics, and drainage area characteristics. And we worked with the roadmap group to develop a list of data that should be evaluated as part of each of those categories. Location is fairly straightforward. The ditch ID, the name of the road, and then the location of the ditch, because when you're looking at ditches, you need to know which side of the road it's on, so that's an important classification there. Looking at the road itself, just some basic characteristics about the classification of the road, the width, number of lanes, posted speed limit, average daily traffic, and roadside vegetation. The data set that we were looking at did include the roadside vegetation. That may be limited in other jurisdictions, but it's important to look at if that is part of your GIS data. For ditch characteristics, we had a longer list to look at here. So some of these things were actually included in King County's data set. This may be more limited for some of the phase 2 jurisdictions, but some things that are helpful to look at in terms of classifying your ditches include the length of the ditch segment, the bottom width, the geometry, the surface type, whether it's vegetated or not, property owner, things related to maintenance, also important, and looking at whether it conveys natural drainage, if it's connected to a stormwater facility, if it's connected to a receiving water body, and if it's a direct discharge or not. So that'll help you kind of classify your ditch maintenance and those activities and prioritize that. For the drainage area itself, we looked at adjacent land use, soil type in the general vicinity, also slopes in the general vicinity, whether there's a landslide or erosion hazard area nearby, wellhead protection areas, and rare and imperiled plant habitat. That was something that was added based on discussion with our roadmap group, but that is a GIS layer that's publicly available that you can take a look at. So helpful to know that in terms of maintenance to see if there may be something specific that you're encountering as part of that. One other thing I wanted to point out that would be useful would be to have the contributing area that drains to each ditch. That wasn't part of our project, but something that could be helpful to include to help you really assess those drainage area characteristics. So what we ended up doing is just having a setback around the ditches, but if you actually had the drainage area to each ditch, you could classify that within the drainage area. So next I want to focus a little bit on the field evaluation. So here's what we're taking a look at in the field. So again, you see the overlap here location, road characteristics, ditch characteristics, and drainage area characteristics. The two new elements are the ditch condition assessment and the structural component assessment. And so again, we worked with the roadmap group to take a look at what types of data we should look at in each of those categories. Location information is the same as the desktop assessment. Road characteristics also fairly similar, but just verifying when you're out in the field what the actual road width is, make sure that agrees with what you're seeing in the GIS data. If you can get information on the slope or drainage direction, that's often easier to look at out in the field. Road condition, that can kind of contribute to what's actually getting into the ditch. And then also looking at the vegetation type. If you don't have that in your database, that information is good to collect out in the field. Ditch characteristics, again, some overlap with what we looked at as part of the desktop assessment, but really looking at if there is standing water in the ditch, looking at the wetted width, again, looking at the geometry, slopes, if there's any check dams or weirs and things like that. So some of that list does overlap with what you're looking at for the desktop assessment. Ditch condition assessment, fairly straightforward there. You're looking at condition of the vegetation, whether there's any sedimentation, erosion, scour, things like that, evidence of noxious weeds, nuisance animals, so things like that to take a look at the condition of the ditch itself. Structural component assessment, you're probably pretty familiar with that from your stormwater BMP inspections, but taking a look at the inlet and outlet and assessing if there's sediment and debris buildup, if there's any structural damage. And then surrounding features, taking a look at is there a sidewalk nearby or other things that we may want to consider as part of our assessment. So using that criteria, we took a look at 23 different ditches throughout King County, and we tried to look for a variety of different ditch geometries and ditch surface types and drainage areas and things like that. So we looked at a pretty broad selection of ditches all throughout King County. Next, I wanted to touch a little bit on the literature review portion of the project. So we looked at 39 local and national ditch maintenance resources, including things ranging from field guides, standard operating procedures, maintenance manuals, retrofit manuals, design guidance, tech memos, and research reports. We actually started off with 26 references, and then through discussion with Roadmap, we added that additional 13 to the project. So looking at things like agricultural ditch maintenance and gravel road ditch maintenance. So there's some other resources that are out there that we evaluated as well. Also locally and nationally, we focused on SOPs and maintenance manuals from the following cities listed up here, as well as SDOT and some resources from AASHTO. So these were requested, the SOPs came in through a request to the roadmap group, and then also from searching on the web to find readily available ditch maintenance SOPs. So for the results, here are the different categories that we looked at, and I'm going to focus on just a few of these today. So classification, looked at the benefits, flow control and water quality concerns, maintenance challenges and strategies, and source control and retrofit strategies. So we grouped into those 9 different categories and actually have a copy of that up on the table here if you want to come take a look at that. What we found is that none of the resources that we looked at actually linked ditch classification and or condition with a specific maintenance and remediation needs. So that was a little disappointing. We were hoping we were finding some, golden key to what ditch maintenance should be and what should be done there. So really we had to lean pretty heavily on roadmap for that input. We did find one study that correlated water quality benefits with the recommended maintenance strategy shown up here, this Washington State Transportation Center study. And they found that the best service level for water quality benefits resulted from excavating the first 75% of a ditch and retaining vegetation in the remaining 25%, and then coming back the next year and excavating that remaining 25%. So they found that basically just denuding the whole ditch of vegetation would actually cause more of a water quality issue than cleaning that first 75%, leaving vegetation in the latter 25%, and then coming back and maintaining that later. There was also a good field guide example from the University of Minnesota. So that was a field guide for maintaining rural roadside ditches, and that was a really good resource that we looked at for this project. So using all that information that we pulled from our field evaluation and desktop assessment, along with input from Roadmap and the literature review, we developed a ditch maintenance matrix. And what that is broken up into 2 different tables. Table 1 is focusing on routine ditch maintenance activities. It includes moving from left to right here, the strategy, description, the condition, the ditch surface type. So I mentioned vegetated, bare soil, paved even can be a ditch surface type. Water flow, whether there's flow, no flow, standing water. Common equipment and material needs, considerations, and references. And we'll go over these in more detail in a minute related to the field guide. The second table focused on corrective ditch maintenance activities, and after some debate with the roadmap group, this is where we placed ditch cleaning, actually, because ditch cleaning is something that you shouldn't be doing on a routine basis. It's something that should be done as needed, but vegetation management is really what you should be doing on a routine basis, and your ditch cleaning is more of a corrective maintenance activity. So the ditch maintenance activities under routine maintenance included mowing, brush cutting, reseeding, minor reseeding and replanting, weed control, invasive species and noxious weed removal. And so that was kind of the bulk of the routine activities. And then we also had cleaning your inlets and outlets and nuisance animal insect control, also important elements of routine ditch maintenance. For corrective ditch maintenance, as I mentioned, this is where our ditch cleaning activities fell, grouped into hand ditching, bucket ditching, and shoulder ditching. Also, this is where we have ditch stabilization, minor ditch reshaping, regrading, major replanting, reseeding. So you'll notice there the minor was under your routine, and the major replanting, reseeding is under corrective actions. Trees of concern, so any hazard trees that you may have that need to be addressed, and then minor inlet outlet repairs. So that information folded into kind of a more graphical guide for field crews. And Emma, if you want to start passing those around, got a couple of copies we'll circulate here that includes the field guide and then each of the fact sheets. So we'll pass those around to take a look at. And also I'll have a link at the end. All these resources are available online on King County's website now. So this is the roadside ditch maintenance field guide. It started off with the goal of being 10 pages, and we ended up at 18 pages, but not too bad to include all that information in a succinct way. So the first page is the introduction. Pages 2 through 9 focus on routine maintenance, and then 10 through 18 on corrective maintenance. So similar to what I just walked through on the matrix, very similar format. There's one page on each maintenance activity. So each of these, mowing, brush cutting, minor reseeding, replanting, they each have a full page on that activity, but kept to a one-page format. And then corrective maintenance, all those things I just mentioned for the matrix, broken out in that section as well. So here's the layout of each of the pages. So again, similar to what we had for the matrix, starting off with the description, condition, surface types, water flow, common equipment and materials. And then the considerations are broken down into considerations prior to implementation, steep slope considerations, if those are applicable to the activity, and disposal considerations, and then a linkage to any of the fact sheets or additional references at the bottom. And so the fact sheets are something that definitely supplement the field guide. So obviously in an 18-page document, you can't cover everything, so we wanted to make sure we really focused on some of that additional content in the fact sheets. We originally started out with 6 fact sheets and then added the source control and retrofit fact sheets based on some feedback from the roadmap group. So I'll walk through what each of those are. So there's 3 fact sheets that are intended for a field crew audience. The first one's looking at considerations for field evaluation of roadside ditches. The second one's looking at ditch cleaning strategies, so that one has a lot of overlap with the field guide. And then the third one is maintaining ditches that convey natural flow. So the first one of those 3, intended for the field crew audience, covers your data collection methods. If you want to do mobile data collection, some tips in there for that. Preparing field equipment and how you assess ditch conditions. So that's a 5-page fact sheet, so a pretty concise read there, but a lot of great information. Ditch cleaning strategies, as I mentioned, this is a shorter one, a 3-page fact sheet that does overlap a bit with the field guide, but still some good information in a succinct form. What is ditch cleaning? Where is it applicable? Why is it important? And some disposal considerations to think about. And then the third one for field crews, this is a topic that came up, and I know this morning too, we were talking about collecting GIS data, so this was something that came up that how do you maintain ditches that convey natural flow? So there's a lot of considerations that go into this. And so this is a 4-page fact sheet that covers the topics highlighted here and what some adjustments that you may need to make for doing maintenance in those types of situations. For the office administrative audience, we had 5 different fact sheets. Stepping down through the list here, and I'll walk through each one of these. So the first one is ditch mapping recommendations, and this ties into Jennifer Schmidt's talk this morning. This is a 5-page fact sheet that walks through why should ditches be mapped, how to match ditch segments, building a centralized database, and desktop analysis. So this is a really important tool for those of you that are looking at, collecting more robust ditch data for your GIS database. So there's some recommendations in here you may want to take a look at for that. Prioritizing ditches for inspection and maintenance. This is also a really great resource. There's a 7-page fact sheet here that talks about assigning a ditch significance score and a ditch condition score, and then a combined ditch significance and ditch condition score. So that's a 7-page fact sheet. There's also now at the end of the project, we had a little budget left over, so we developed a ditch scoring geodatabase and mobile app in Survey 123 that goes along with this. So if you're actually interested in going out and collecting that data and prioritizing your ditches, those are some great resources to draw from that are already developed through this project that can be used by anyone in the state. And then the third one here is permit requirements for ditch maintenance. So I know a lot of you are pretty familiar with the permit requirements, but it's great to have this concise resource. It's a 5-page fact sheet, and it focuses on the MPDS permit, both the current permit and the upcoming permit, disposal considerations, linked to the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, and then some information on ditches that convey natural flow. And then the last 2 that we added, source control strategies for ditches. This is the shortest one out of the pack, but obviously very important. So controlling sources before they make it into your ditch obviously would improve the water quality of the ditch if you can address those before they get to the ditch. So why is it important and when is it needed? And some additional resources to take a look at there. And then the last one of the pack is the ditch retrofit strategies. So this ended up being a 6-page fact sheet. So, and really this is what Doug mentioned as kind of the driver for future projects. Obviously there's lots of great ideas here to consider, some issues and potential retrofit strategies, and there's some great information in there drawing a lot from what Kitsap County started with their ditch retrofit manual as well. So all the materials developed for this project just got posted on Friday, so you can now download them. It's a longer URL, but the short version, kingcounty.gov/ditches, will take you right to that page. I did bring some flash drives today too. If you want an electronic copy, feel free to come up and grab that. That's got all the resources on there as well. And then I think the materials will also be posted on the Stormwater Center website in the future, but they're in the process of updating their website, so we want to make sure we had them available on King County's website for you to take and use, and hopefully there's some good resources there for you in your programs.